Hey everybody, this is Dave here with Blue Bears Games. This week's video we are going to be doing a Blues Brews. This is not a budget deck, this is actually my own personal deck. I just finished the build recently and I wanted to go over my build with everybody and show you what I made for what would be Pir and Toothy. Alright, for those of you that have never been to my channel or seen any of my videos, welcome. For those of you that are returning, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and go over this deck build. This, again, is not a budget build. This is my version of Pir and Toothy, and it's a little different than most people's. I am not actually doing a Pir and Toothy deck where Toothy is the main combo where you draw into a Jace Wielder of Mysteries or a Thassa's Oracle or a Laboratory Maniac version. I didn't want to do that. I already have that in a deck. I wanted to focus on Pir. So this deck will have Toothy in it because they're a partner and it's how I got the two colors, but we're going to focus on Pir's ability and we're going to have fun. This deck is not a cutthroat win deck. This is a themed deck that I wanted to have fun with. So sit back, relax, we're going to go over the deck with you. Alright, so Toothy, if you don't know, has a combo where if you blink him or if you exile him and return him back to play quickly, there's a combo where you can, he has the ability, I'll read it to you. It says, whenever you draw a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. And then when he leaves the battlefield, draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on him. If you blink him, basically exiling him and then returning him back to play, the way that the triggers stack, you can actually draw the cards and put the +1/+1 counters back on him. But that's not how this deck is going to work. If you want to know more about that, go ahead and send me a message and I'll explain it to you. But we're going to focus on Pir for most of this deck. Toothy is just an added bonus. So Pir is if one or more counters will be put on a permanent your team controls, that many +1 of each of those kinds of counters are put on that permanent instead. So there's a lot of things in this deck that are going to focus on counters. So I'm going to go over all that with you right now. First thing I want to mention before I go through that is I wanted to let you guys know, so some people might want to know, I go with, as far as my deck protection goes, I go with, what are they? They are Dragon Shield sleeves because they're a little bit taller than most of them. I used to use Ultra Pros, they're just too small for me now. I do not double sleeve, I don't shuffle so harshly that I need to double sleeve. For this deck, because it's Simic or green-blue, I went with petrol color, just because I thought it fit nicely. It's a nice darker green and has a little bit of blue in it, so it fit the theme of the color of the deck. I also use Ultimate Guard Sidewinders decks. These are the 100+ Xeno skins. I like them because of the way that they fit in. When you go ahead and try to take a deck out, and let me zoom out a little bit here. When you got to try to take your deck out, it has two cutouts so you can grab the deck and pull it out. So these are the deck boxes that I use, and the sleeves that I use are the Ultra Pros. I know some people use katanas and Ultimate Guard stuff. I use their boxes, I don't use their sleeves. I don't actually think I've ever seen them. Maybe I will at some point, but anyway, let's go through the deck. So as you guys know, I always start off with lands, and let me go ahead and zoom in just a little bit more so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. I'm just going to go over the basics of what each card is in here for, and if you guys want to read what the card actually does, if I don't read it for you, you can go ahead and pause the video and then you can read what it does. So every deck that's not one color uses Command Tower. We're in blue-green, so obviously Tropical Island. Yes, it's real. Yes, I know not everybody has this. You don't have to put this in there. Breeding Pool for the Shockland version, Hinterland Harbor for the Checkland version, and then a Misty Rainforest for the Fetch Land. I used the Filterland Flooded Grove, and then the Painland Yavimaya Coast. An Opal Palace I don't normally use, but because this deck focuses on +1/+1 counters, I went ahead and went with an Opal Palace for the first time in any deck I use. And again, with counters being the focus of this deck, I added Mirrodin's Core. It taps to remove a charge counter from it and add 1 mana of any color, and you can tap it to put a charge counter on, or it doesn't come into play tapped, so you can tap it for a colorless if you need to. Gemstone Mine, because it comes into play with counters. With Pir out, it's going to come into play with 4 counters. Just remember to keep counters on it, because once the last one is removed, you will lose the Gemstone Mine. Alchemist's Refuge, because I wanted to be able to cast things at instant speed. so naturally, and it's blue-green. And of course, Karn's Bastion, because Proliferate will be the main focus of this deck, at least in some form of it. This is one of them. It's the land version, so it's harder to get rid of. Arch of Vraska, because why not? It helps you draw cards, so I added that in there. And as far as Ascend goes, you should be able to get there in Commander. Reliquary Tower, because there are a lot of ways to draw cards in this deck, so why not have that in there? Mage Ring Network, just like the Mirrodin's Core, it taps to add a colorless, doesn't come into play tapped. You can pay 1 and tap it to put a storage counter on it, and then you can remove X of those counters to add X colorless to your mana pool. And remember, with Proliferate and Pir and all the things that I'm going to show you that I used to just create tokens, and counters, this will be able to kind of get pretty bit high up there in the counters. And then, of course, my basics. I chose, I think it's like 5 or 6 of the M21 alternate frame forests, foil ones, of course. The Zendikar Rising full arts for the rest of them. I have 15 total forests, I believe, in here. And I will have the deck list in the comment section so you can check my numbers. I don't remember them. And then, I think it's 4, yeah, it's 4 islands that were the M21 alternate border, or different bordered basic lands. So that was the basics. I think it's 34 total lands, 34 or 35. Again, you can check me by clicking on, I used MTG Goldfish, that link below. You can go ahead and check it there. Normally I go into the next section, which is my ramp section. It's a little different on the ramp here. Usually I have a very specific set of mana rocks I like to use. This deck I wanted to go a little different because I wanted to use some different stuff. So we're going to go with Everflowing Chalice on this one because it comes into play with counters with a multi-kicker of 2. So for each time you pay 2 into it when you cast it, it gets a counter. And then, of course, with Pure out, it might get another one. Other ways, with Proliferate, you may get more. This thing's going to get a lot of counters on it. You'll be able to tap it for a bunch of mana. All right. Astral Cornucopia was a last-minute ad because I just acquired a collection. I didn't have one on my own, and this does what I wanted to do for this deck. And since it was in the collection, I took something else out to put it in there in the last second. This comes into play. It's triple X, so for every 3 you put into it when you cast it, so 3, 6, 9, 12, it'll come into play with counters. And then it taps to add a mana of whatever color you choose for each counter on it. And of course, again, with all the stuff that's going to add counters, it'll be able to pretty much tap for a good amount of mana. A Soul Ring goes in every deck I put in. Empowered Auto Generator, same thing as with the Everflowing Chalice and the Astral Cornucopia, only this one plays a little different. I don't like that it enters tapped, but it does self-add counters. So you tap it to put a counter on it, and then you add X mana to your mana pool for each counter on it of the chosen color. So you add the counter first and then add the mana. So it self-adds counters, so I had to add it. A Rampant Growth, we're in green, so a Rampant Growth, a Nature's Lure, and it's mostly farce, a Cultivate, a Kadama's Reach, and then, of course, a Far Wanderings. Those are my choices. That's my mana rocks and my mana ramping. And since we're in green, always nice to have the option for mana ramping. Next, we're going to go into the actual, main theme of the deck was obviously counters, but in a way. So this deck is going to actually be Hydra Tribal with a sub-theme of spikes. If you don't know what the spikes are, go look at the Tempest block. It's a great set of creatures. I love them. I've loved them since I started. I played this game a long time, and spikes are one of my favorite tribes, I guess. They're a very small tribe, but man, they were fun to play. So first we start off with a Mistcutter Hydra because it's uncounterable. It's got Pro Blue, and the X is obviously added +1/+1 counter. Same thing with Hungering Hydra. It's 1 green and X, and then it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature, so it's pretty resilient as far as... This is where the first way to win in this deck. This is the combat focus section of the deck. It's in the creatures. There are other things that they will focus on, but for now I'm going to focus on the combat section. Protean Hydra. It's not a bad one. Vastwood Hydra. And all these things end up adding more counters as you go. Genesis Hydra. And again, I'll hold them here so you guys can read what they do, and you can pause the video if you need to. Steelbane was a little bit of defense because you can remove a counter to destroy an artifact or enchantment, so if somebody has a lock going and this is already in play, you can kind of get out of the lock. Hooded Hydra, this one was one of the ones that I was thinking about cutting and adding other things in as they're made. There are some things I do want to change out of here, but that's for a later date. Voracious Hydra, has the ability to come into play with two different things. You can either double the counters of X, or you can have it fight a creature. Evolution stage, because I want to proliferate as much as possible, and this lets it's basically landfall ability without saying landfall. Mana Gorger Hydra is because you're in a multiplayer game, so a lot of people are going to be casting spells that'll get bigger as you go. The first spike, there are 3 in here. You will see 2 of them now and 1 later. This is Spike Feeder. So spikes are all pretty much the same. They're, 1 more to cast than the actual counters they come into play, I think, is most of them. So this one's 3 to cast, comes in with 2 counters. Their abilities always have this first one, which is 2 and remove a counter from it to put a counter on another creature. Remember, with Pir's ability, when you remove the counter from this and put it on another thing, Pir's ability hits whatever the counter goes on. So if you remove one from a spike and put it on another creature, it gets an additional. So keep that in mind. And this one has the other ability of just removing a +1/+1 counter to gain life. That's to help keep you alive longer. Spike Weaver, also for defense purposes, it comes into play with 3 counters. Again, here's that 4, and then you get 3 counters. And then you can pay to remove a +1/+1 counter from it and add a counter to something else, just like all of them do. And then its last ability is pay 1 and remove a counter, and then Fog, which basically means creatures deal no combat damage this turn. So a little bit of defense, a little bit of, keeping you alive longer from the spikes. Then the last spike, when I go over it, you'll see why it's going to be the last thing I go over. Then Renata, because everything here has to come in with counters at some point. This will just come out and everything will come in with an additional. Even if they don't come in with a counter, they come in with 1 because of Renata. Polychronos for a little bit of defense, so that when you make it monstrous, it fights up to. That's very key there, up to. You don't have to use the fight ability. Just be aware of that. So you can have it fight things, you can have it not fight things. It just depends on what the board situation looks like. Hero's Bane, because it itself adds counters. I like things that add their counters by themselves, and it doubles them. Cloning Hydra, speaking of doubling, it's a 5 to cast Trampler, 0/0, but it comes into play with 4 counters by itself, and then whenever it attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. They don't have to be attacking themselves, so keep that in mind. Gargos, because we're in Hydra Tribal, and this is the only, technically, I say technically, Hydra Lord. It's 6 to cast for an 8/7, so that's pretty good right there. Power toughness it has abilities, no negatives for 6 to cast 8/7. It has vigilance. It makes your Hydra spells cast 4 less to cast. What that means is, if you have, I'll just go through the first one, Mistcutter Hydra. If you have Gargos out and you pay 1 green and nothing else, it comes into play with 4 +1/+1 counters. It adds 4 even to the X. Just keep that in mind. Vigor, because, well, why not? It's pretty much if it was a Hydra, it would just be too much. It has Trample. It's a 6/6 for 6, so again, good stuff there. If damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage, and then put a +1/+1 counter on it for each damage prevented, so it kind of helps with putting more and more and more counters. There is the theme there. For the purposes of this deck, I just wanted everything to just keep gaining counters. +1/+1 counters, sometimes tokens, who knows. And then, obviously, there's the last ability here. It's when Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere you shuffle it into the library. So, even if it dies, it can come back. For the combat version of the Wincon for here, Herald of Secret Streams, it makes it so all creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them are unblockable. Deep Glow Skate, didn't realize when I put it in here that it read all, not A. So, when it enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. I thought it was only 1. Hydroid Krasis, so it's a blue, a green, and X. This is to help draw cards and gain life to keep you alive. It's flying trample, and then you can draw half X cards and gain half X life. The actual beginning of this deck started with Varel of the Whole Clade. This was actually the original commander until I bought a Battle Bond booster box and got Pir and Toothy out of one of the packs. This is usually a target as soon as it hits the board, because it pretty much, as a commander, it pretty much is kill or die. Kill it or you will die. So, its ability, you can read here, it doubles, for each counter on an artifact, a creature, or a land, you can put another one of those counters on there for each one. So it doesn't say double, because for each kind of counter means it could have a trample counter on it now. And even though that wasn't around back then, I guess they planned for it. Fathom Mage, it has evolved. It's here so that when you put the +1/+1 counters on it, you can draw cards. So it's another way for card drawing. I know we're in blue, but I wanted to go a little different on the card draw. Master Biomancer I've had since I opened this when Gatecrash was released. It was one of the first foils I got. Never been able to do anything with it. Finally found a way. It helps give more +1/+1 counters, and I'll let it sit here for a second so you can read it. And then Zagana, Utopian Speaker. It's here just because it says each creature you control with the +1/+1 counter on it has trample. It itself can gain counters through its own ability of adapting, but I wanted it for the combat section of this deck. Trample was evasion in some sort of way. And then the last creature that is in the combat section of this is Krufix, God of Horizons. Yes, it's indestructible. Yes, it's a 4/7, and yes, it's 5 to cast. It's only in here because I have ways of producing a lot of mana, and I wanted to use Krufix as basically a mana battery, just to store it all up so that I can use it when I need to. So, and that's the little section of the creatures here, minus a couple, and I'll show you those in a minute. I'm going to go over the, I don't know, this is like defense, and this is all utility stuff. One of the reasons I wanted to make this deck, besides the fact that I had Varel, and then I saw Pir and Toothy, was the Ozolith was created. It helps so that you can move counters around. And remember, on the Ozolith, when counters are moved off of things and onto things, they actually are taken off and then counted as putting on for Pir's ability to actually hit. So when a creature dies and the +1/+1 counters go on the Ozolith, Pir's ability adds an additional. Keep that in mind. Obviously, Proliferate is prominent in this deck, so Contagion Clasp and Contagion Engine. One proliferates twice, one does it once, just to keep the ball rolling on gaining counters. Unbound Flourishing, because whenever I cast a spell with X, it doubles it. Whenever I use an ability that has X in it, I double it. And then whenever a opponent I cast has X in its cost, I double it. Obviously, that's what this deck does. Branching Evolution and to a greater extent, Doubling Seasons. So both of these are in here for the same reason. So Branching Evolution says whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on something, it's doubled. And in Doubling Season, any counter and any token are doubled. So these are my doublers. These are the backbone of this deck. If one of these is out, along with the Pir, you've pretty much got control of the game. Green Sun Zenith, because as you saw with Unbound Flourishing, with X you can double things, so I can go search for something. You don't go search for a Hydra with this. X will equal 0 on spells like this, so you want to go find one of your, for this spell specifically, I would suggest going after things like the Vigor or something of that sort. Worldly Tutor, so I can go search for a Hydra if I need it, instead of searching for something that'll come into play with no counters. Path of Discovery, because it does everything I want to do and more. It puts +1/+1 counters on things, or it gives me land in my hand so I can not miss my land drop. Guardian Project, I don't know if you've not seen any of my videos, you've seen me tout this many a times. This is my favorite green card for Commander. It may be the best in my opinion because green does this so much. This is probably the best green card made for Commander in my opinion, ever. So whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name, I mean, the downfall to this card is specifically geared towards Commander. You can draw a card. If there isn't another card in under your control that doesn't match, if none of the creatures match, you can draw a card. Finale of Revelation for a couple reasons. So it's X, so Unbound Flourishing does hit this. If X equals 10 or more, you get the thing that I need, because you can draw a lot of cards in this deck. It gives you an unremovable ability to have maximum hand size for the rest of the game. You have none, so that's why that's in there. And Leyline of Anticipation, because just like the land, what's it called again, Alchemist Refuge, just like the land, I want to be able to cast everything at instant speed because, well, I'm a blue player and that's what blue does. So that's the utility section. It has a couple things in there to help, help the deck along. Now, you saw that I had a lot of token doublers, no, not a lot of token doublers, but a lot of counter doublers. So I have quite a bit of, not quite a bit, but, a good amount of Planeswalkers to go in this deck. And they're here for different reasons. So, Jiang Yangu is in here because most of these are going to have static abilities because the static abilities are what I needed. So this has each creature you control with the +1/+1 counter has tap it to add a mana of any color, and it can also put a +1/+1 counter on it. That is great for this deck because everything's going to have a counter on it, so then they all become mana dorks. Vivian, because I wanted to be able to cast things with flash. Its other abilities are nominal at best, but they still work, so you can use them as well. Nissa Voices Zendikar was because of the -2 ability, but all of their abilities are actually relevant here. So you can put a 0/1 token into play, and with Doubling Season, it becomes 2 of them. You can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. That's quite important in this deck. And then you can ultimate her, and you can gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. So, and there is another little thing to go with Nissa here. You'll see that in a second. Vivian, the other one, the Monster's Advocate, just because I wanted to be able to look at the top card of my library. I wanted to be able to play cards from the top of my library. Realize that if you keep seeing over and over a creature card on top of your library, you can keep playing them as if though they're in your hand. So that's why I wanted that in there. As far as the rest of her abilities, they're nominal again. I mean, they're okay. They're just not what this deck does, but her static abilities were what I wanted. So with Vivian, like I said, where is it? Yeah. You gain X life and you draw X cards where X is the number of lands you control. Works very well with Nissa. So remember, Doubling Season, while it doesn't add counters when you uptick a Planeswalker, they do come into play with double the counters. So you can ultimate her right off the bat if you have a Doubling Season in play. Keep that in mind. She has her static ability is to add additional green whenever you tap a forest. Always good for getting more stuff out quicker and making them bigger because they're all X cast stuff. Her +1, it's okay, but her ultimate is absolutely fabulous in this deck. You get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible, so you don't have to worry about your lands anymore. And then you can search your library for any number of forest cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So again, with the Nissa, you can draw a ton of cards with it, but with her ultimate going off, remember that it's not just the 15 forests, because it says forests, it doesn't say basic forests. So search your library for any number of forest cards. So you can go search for the tropical island. You can go search for, what's the other one called? The not the Hinterland Harbor. What is this called? The breeding pool. Sorry, my memory's shot. Breeding pool. So you've got 17 forests total that you can go search for and put them into play. Up to, because, it depends on how late in the game this is. So it's always a good one. So that's where the Doubling Season comes in, where you can actually ultimate right off the bat. Narset, because you don't want your opponents gaining any type of card advantage. Why would you ever want to? The secondary ability of the -2 is nominal, but remember, if you have a Doubling Season in play, plus up here, this will come into play with 11 counters. Or 12, actually. Let me see. 5, add the 1, so it's 6. Yeah, so up to 12. And then Cure, because I wanted more ability to draw cards. Her ability is okay. This is one of those ones where I could replace it if I really wanted to with something that might have bigger impact from a newer set that comes out in the future. So that's that. Then now I'm going to go over the combos, or the synergy cards, and the Wincons. And this one's going to take a second, so just bear with me. So I'm going to go over the first one. It's the easiest one. It's the oldest one. We have Sylvan Library Abundance. If you don't know what this combo does, I highly suggest you read on about it. Abundance replaces draw effects, and Sylvan Library adds 2 cards to draw. Once you replace the draw 2 cards, you stop there and you start the Abundance because it's a replacement effect. So this you can essentially draw 3 cards, but you're not drawing. You're putting 3 cards, and you get to name land or non-land into your hand. That's why I needed the ability to make it so you have no maximum hand size in this deck, because this is a very old but a good, very good, in my opinion, For green, especially since it doesn't draw cards, it's a great way for that to work. So that's the first combo. Second, I'm going to go over the first infinite. I hate this card. Jace Cunning Castaway does nothing for me. However, in a deck that does nothing but add counters, you can actually go infinite with just a Jace Cunning Castaway. Remember, I wanted to make it so that things could be, I could cast things in an instant. So it doesn't work here as well as I would hope, but you'd be able to cast it and then go from there. If you had a Teferi where you could activate loyalty abilities anytime on anybody's turn, that would be different. So what I have here is with Jace Cunning Castaway, if you have a doubling season in play, it comes into play with 6 counters, loyalty counters. You can ultimate right off the bat. You can create 2 more tokens of Jace. 1 token of Jace would put a 2/2 elemental into play, or I'm sorry, illusion into play, and the other one would ultimate again, creating 2 more tokens. Essentially, an infinite loop of creating another set of 2 Jace Cunning Castaways and then creating an infinite amount of 2/2 illusion creatures. That's the first combo. Again, I hate this card, but when I saw that would work in this deck, I said, you know what, I'm going to try it because I want it to be funny. This deck is all about doing crazy things. I have dubbed this the Can I Get Away With That deck. That's what this deck is. Can I get away with winning with a Jace Cunning Castaway? Alright. Number 2. Wincon. Dark Steel Reactor. It's indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a counter on it. It's a charge counter. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 20 or more counters on it, you win the game. Obviously, if we're proliferating, if we're with Pir and doubling seasons and everything, whenever something gets put on it, you're going to put a bunch of them on there. So you might be able to get 5 a turn. And you may be, if it can survive, especially since it's indestructible, you may be able to get a win out of that. It's cheap as far as the win goes, but you know what? This is one of those decks where I just don't care. Can I get away with it? Alright. Next, you can take infinite turns with this deck. So, you have the 2 clasps, the contagions. The contagion engine and contagion clasp. They add 3. You can proliferate 3 times. If you have Peer out or doubling season, you get multiple counters every time you do each one of them. You just need to get a counter on this. You need to have it survive 1 turn, or worst case scenario, if you have the ability to cast it as an instant, flash it at the end of your opponent's turn, put a counter on it, start your turn. You can literally take infinite turns from there. So when you proliferate and you have something like Peer or a doubling season out, when you do it, you can get the 3 counters on it, remove them, tap it and remove them, take an extra turn after this one, and then proliferate again to put the counters back on. You make sure, though, you have to have at least an extra counter on here every time. Otherwise, you miss out on the infinite loop. So that's another way you can do it. Just keep taking turns until you've got your win set in zone. Cheap win number 2. Simic Ascendancy. I mean, you had to know this was coming. This whole premise of this deck is Simic Ascendancy. So you can use its ability to put +1/+1 counters on creatures, and then whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on it, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 20 or more counters on it, you win the game. Simple, easy, cheap. Number 3, cheap win. Helix Pinnacle. 1 to cast, as Shroud, so it can't be targeted by anybody. And then you can pay X and put X counters on it, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more counters on it, you win the game. So, several ways to win cheaply. Not going to apologize for that. This deck is not meant to just out and out win. It's meant to have fun and see what you can get away with. That's another one. The last combo, it's my jank combo. I have to go over this. It's going to take me a minute. Bear with me. So, we're going to start off with a spike. This rogue is the entire combo. It comes into play with 2 counters. Again, like the other spikes, you can pay 2 and remove a +1/+1 counter from it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. You can also pay 2 to remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature and put it onto Spike Rogue. Do you see where I'm going with that? And if you don't, I'm going to explain anyway. With Peer out, doubling season, Unbound Flourishing, is that what it's called? Unbound Flourishing? Whatever it's called, the other one. No, it's not called Unbound Flourishing. I'm sorry. What is it called? Branching Evolution. With Branching Evolution out, you're going to be switching counters out left and right. So, with even just a Peer out, when you pay 2 mana, to remove a +1/+1 counter from the spike and put it on something else, you're getting 2 counters out of it. Okay? Imagine if you have a doubling season or a branching evolution where you double it. So now you have 4 counters moving back and forth each time you pay 2. That's where Cryptic Trilobite comes in. If you keep moving counters back and forth between the Spike Rogue and Cryptic Trilobite, the ability to remove a +1/+1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite, to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, and then the caveat is you can only spend it to activate abilities, but that's okay because that's what you're doing. You're activating Spike's ability, all Spike's abilities. You're also activating Walking Ballista, because for every 4 you put into it as an ability, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and we all know how Walking Ballista ends games. So that's my little jank combo. If you need this explained in further detail, send me a message. I'll go ahead and do it. This is my jankiest combo I will allow myself to play. I love that it actually is a little more unique than anything else, because Cryptic Trilobite is like newer and Spike Rogue is older. I haven't seen this combo anywhere else, so I'm coining this as Blue Bear's jank. This is my jankiest combo ever. Sure, the Walking Ballista is not as much jank, but there are other things you can do in this deck with the mana. You can add counters to Helix Pinnacle to win the game. You know, there's a lot of things you can do with it. You can... Where's the other one? You can use the mana to add the counter to Magistrate's Scepter. I mean, there's just so many different things you can do. So that's my little janky combo that I love. So I'm gonna do 1 second here. Give me 1 second. Okay, I had to reset the film. It was gonna have a little blip in it, but so that's my jank combo. That is what what this whole deck was built around. So, if you're gonna search for something with the Worldly Tutor, Spike Rogue, or Cryptic Trilobite, or Walking Ballista, may be what your target is going to be. So, anyway, that is my my version, my interesting, janky, no actual like cutthroat version of Pir and Toothy. I know everybody else does the Toothy version where Toothy helps you draw a lot of cards so you can draw your entire deck and then you win that way. I wanted to go a little different, so hopefully you found something here that you liked, that you could use, or it helped you with a build that you're looking at, or just entertained you for the last, what is it now, 25-30 minutes. Hopefully it did one of the things. Again, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or anything like that, comment section below. You can go to the Facebook page and directly message me. I'm always available. I'm retired. I don't do anything but this, so I'm always around to talk. Again, the deck list, the full deck list, will be available also in the section below as well, in the description. So if you want to take a look at everything, you can see how much the deck costs, all that stuff. How exact number for the lands, whatever. I'm also going to ask, please like the video. I work hard at this. I try to give the best content I can, and you know what? I don't actually do a lot of research on what other people do because I don't want to be like them. I want to be unique. So, give the video a like. It helps me get what I try to do out there. Subscribe if you haven't done so yet, please. So we're at 254 as the making of this video. I promised everybody that I would do a giveaway, and I'm going to. So I'm going to add to this that if you, in the comments of this video, if you make a comment that you'd like to get one of my giveaway is for arena codes. I have a whole bunch of them from the collection I bought, so I'm going to give away 3 of them. So the first 3 people to comment that they'd like one of the codes, they win that. When we hit 300, I'll be giving away a secret lair code as well for arena. So get me there. Share this video out. Try to get other people to join in this. I need more suggestions for things to do. The more people, the better, the more I can do. So, and that's all I got for you this week. Like I said, if you have any questions or comments, just go ahead and contact me. I'm always around. So, until next week, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you then.